All right, welcome back to another episode of the Agendas podcast. I'm your host Harry here with Ben. Ben, what's going on?
How we doing? How we doing?
We're doing good. I just want a quick shout out. We're going to start doing this at the beginning of the podcast to the social media. If you haven't followed us yet, we're on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, at the Agendas Pod. If you want some more of our content, some short clips, things of that nature. But it's finally NBA Finals time. And I'm excited. I think this is a really interesting finals. Last year, when it was Denver Heat, I kind of had no interest. I don't even know if I turned on a game of that. Maybe game one or game two. I think game two, the Heat might have won, tied up the series 1-1 in Denver, and I was like, oh shoot, are the Heat going to use their like magical Heat pixie dust to win this series too? And then like Denver's like, yeah, no, that's not happening. We're just better. But this finals is a lot more interesting. I don't remember the exact last time we talked about it. I think the Celtics series was probably over, and the Maverick series was not quite over. So maybe we'll touch a little bit on the end of that Maverick series with Minnesota. They went up 3-0, and that's kind of the series. I mean, Minnesota did fight back for that game four, and then game five it was just a massacre. And we've seen Luka do this before. Me and Ben talked about this off air. It's the similar thing to what happened back. I think it was 2021. No, 2022, the year after the Suns made the finals and they were back in the conference finals or the second round, game seven. And Luka just, the game was over at halftime. He had like 25, 30 points, similar type of thing. And the game was just over at halftime. There's something they can do. And I think, it was kind of showing how Luka's in a different tier than Anthony Edwards. That's kind of what that game showed me. Obviously, Anthony Edwards has had his moments throughout this playoffs, but that was kind of just like, yeah, I'm Luka Doncic and you're not. And that kind of ended that series right there. Kyrie also played great. Kyrie had a great series. I know people were talking about how great he was playing in the postseason before that, but if you looked at like in the Thunder series, he had a couple of single-digit games. So like I understand you can affect the game in other ways, but if you have 9 points in a game, unless you're Draymond Green, you didn't have a great game. Okay, for the most part. Okay, people try to get cute with it. It's like, oh well, he added the playmaking and the rebounding. It's like, brother, you had 9 points. Okay, so let's not overcomplicate things. But Luka was phenomenal. I thought Luka that series was an A. He was really good in that series. Now the first two series, we talked about this before. I don't think he was that. He was kind of up and down, hit or miss. And talked about the injuries. Obviously, no injury talk because they won this series in 5 games and he played great, so he's not injured anymore. Great, but um, yeah, Luka was phenomenal, and you know, it's not crazy for this point of his career. It's not a crazy trajectory for him to be in the finals, right? He's 25 years old. I think I saw something. He's made five straight first team All NBAs. So it's kind of waiting for his postseason success. Obviously, he had that conference finals run, but they weren't really too competitive in that conference finals. And once in a while, there's like a conference finals team that like makes it, and just because you made the conference finals doesn't mean you were actually that good, like the Pacers this year. But it's not a crazy trajectory for Luka to be in the finals at this point. It kind of makes sense in terms of most superstars. LeBron was in the finals young. Durant was in the finals young. And that echelon of player. Steph made it a little bit later just because he kind of bloomed later, and Giannis kind of made it later because he kind of bloomed later. But Luka Doncic, we talked about Jokic before. When we thought Jokic was going to go to the finals and potentially win another finals, what it could do for his legacy. Luka Doncic has a chance. If he wins a finals and a finals MVP, all of a sudden, like it's like, could he be in those top 10 players of all time conversations? The regular season stuff is going to be there. He's going to have to win some MVPs, obviously, but with five first team All NBA teams, it doesn't seem like he's going to slow down anytime soon. And I wouldn't be shocked if he won 10 or 15 first team All NBAs and is up there with some of the most ever. So if he can contribute with that postseason success, I think that's a big storyline for this series. Another big storyline is Kyrie Irving. Um, he obviously had that finals win in Cleveland where he played great and hit the game-winning shot. Kind of a chance to cement his legacy as one of the all-time greats. I think he's borderline one of the all-time greats in terms of talent. He's definitely there, but I just don't think he's done quite enough. People say Kyrie Irving, and they're like fascinated by his skill set and how he plays, and it's entertaining, and he has the brand and stuff like that. But I think a second championship would really be like, okay, this guy's one of the maybe one of the five greatest point guards ever, or something like that. Put him in those conversations. But Ben, just early quick thoughts. I know we're going to get deeper into this. What are the main storylines you have from the Dallas side of things going into this NBA Finals?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really a big storylines guy in general, but I mean, I think you kind of hit on what people are going to be interested in. I think the Jason Tatum train has left, and that's not really even a storyline. He could go 30 points a game unless he has a Luka game 5 game. No one's gonna care. So I think whatever. I'm always more of a nuance guy than storylines guy, but I think you hit on the big points.
Yeah, we tend to look deeper into the what actually happened on this podcast. That's kind of the goal of the podcast, and not just to, like, be sucked in by the storylines. But I mean, these are things that matter. The Luka Doncic thing, I don't think it's a storyline. I think if he plays great and wins the finals, it's like, okay, now we have to start looking at this guy's legacy, much more seriously. Not that he doesn't already have a great legacy, and even if he lost his finals, he'd still be fine. But yeah, it's something when you're talking about a potential top 10 player of all time, you don't see that every single day of the week, and people like hyperbole and stuff like that. But again, if he wins finals and the finals MVP, and we'll see if he plays great, he's definitely going to be in those conversations. And then from the Boston side
For
of things,
sure,
yeah,
because that's no, for sure. I'll just jump in just for sure because of how much weight gets put on you. He first of all, if they win the finals, he will be the finals MVP. That goes without saying. I think there's a chance he's the finals MVP if they lose, which is nuts. I don't know if that's
I
ever
think
happened.
that's a
I'm
zero
not a
percent
big
chance.
history.
I think that's a 0% chance.
Okay, okay, but fine. If they win the finals, he will 100% chance to be the finals MVP. Take my money on that bet right now. I don't know if you can bet that if they win, he will be the MVP, but I would
Can
bet
I
some
throw something in
good
real
money on
quick?
that. Yeah.
Just for the gambling point of view, I've heard this before. It's like, yeah, like Ben is saying, if you think the Mavericks are going to win the finals, it's probably, I don't know what the exact odds are, but like it's probably just bet on Luka to win Finals MVP, and then you get better odds. And like Ben's saying, it's like that's guaranteed it's going to happen.
Oh, that's really interesting. Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah, it's got to be longer odds, and I mean, there's a 0% chance. It would be impossible. It would literally be impossible. It would be Kyrie would have to be so much better. It would be impossible. I mean, whatever. Regardless. And then just yeah, winning the finals. That's like a blank check. No one's gonna care that he was a garbage can. As by superstar standards, he was a garbage can for the first two series. Um, and he basically just got carried to the Western Conference Finals. And whatever we get into nuances and how this is such a defensive team and he's a bad defender. We get into the whole thing, but I'm saying if he like you're saying if he wins the finals, he will definitely be in all-time conversations because he's gonna have an All-NBA list. I'll be shocked if he doesn't have MVP by the end. Probably people will have him over Jokic because he'll have the finals. Jokic has a finals. Never mind, take that back. But sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, he'll be in those conversations. And again, with Jokic, you kind of jump the gun, like, oh, he's going to win the next three, and like you can never know with these things. The other thing with Luka is, especially if he wins the finals, I think even if he doesn't, he's going to be the favorite going into next year for the MVP, and maybe we can get into that. I think we'll do some type of NBA offseason or NBA season recap or playoff recap or something like that. Maybe we can get into that a little bit more. I think he's going to be the favorite going into next year just because it's a storyline thing. But I just want to touch on some Boston storylines. I know we don't get too deep into this, and then we'll get into some matchups and how we think the series is going to play out. Tatum, Tatum's an interesting player. I think he probably gets hated on a little bit too much. Me and Ben were talking about fair. He's probably properly rated. He's probably in that 6 to 7 range. I think if he wins a Finals and Finals MVP, he can probably cement himself maybe in the 5 range. I think over Shea. I think if he won Finals and Finals MVP, it's like, okay, maybe this guy's better than Shea, or at least in the perceived, in the NBA world. But other than that, this team has to win a finals. If it's not going to win this year, I don't know when it's going to happen. Their team is stacked. Hopefully, Porzingis comes back. We'll get into that too. But outside of Jason Tatum, it's kind of like meh. Who cares? Like Jaylen Brown winning a ring, who cares? Joe Mazzulla winning a ring, who cares? It's kind of just like this team is an all-time great team in terms of numbers wise, not in terms of eye test necessarily, but and maybe eye test too. But this team has to win a ring. But let's get into more of the matchup side of things, and let's start with Dallas because I think it's interesting. You know, in the first couple rounds, of their first 3 rounds of the playoffs so far, I mean, they faced the Clippers without Kawhi, so they kind of had like Paul George and Harden, and then they faced OKC with just Shea, and they didn't really have to worry about a second option, you know. And then they faced the Timberwolves, who was kind of just Anthony Edwards, and you don't really have to worry about anyone else in terms of a creator offensive player. And then now with this series with Boston, it's like you have Tatum, you have Jaylen Brown, Drew Holiday's been really good this postseason, Derek White, maybe Porzingis comes back. I think it's a whole different ball game in terms of what they're going to be facing as a defense. I know their defense has looked much better the second half of the season and into the NBA Finals, but it's just you can't compare it to what they faced so far. Maybe if Kawhi was healthy and they beat the Clippers with Kawhi healthy, you could compare it to something like that in terms of the two forwards and some other talent around them. But I think they're going to be in it for a shock in terms of it's cute how good they've been defensively. In my opinion, I'll put it like that. It's cute, But I'd be surprised if Boston's not putting up 115, 20 points a game because that's what Boston does, and there's too many options to take away. And Dallas has some very good plus defenders. PJ Washington, Derek Jones Jr. has been plus. The centers are pretty good. But and Kyrie and Luka have served their roles. I know people like to say, oh, they've been good defenders. No one when Luka Doncic gets switched on to the other team's star player, the other team is not upset. We'll put it like that. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's really how you tell if someone's a good defender. I know people like defensive rating or look ESPN will put up a number. This is the numbers when Luka guarded this player. Like, yeah, but you can't tell because if there's help and other factors that they don't show. I'll ask you like this: if Luka Doncic gets switched off to Jason Tatum in the pick and roll, Boston's not crying. We'll put it like that, right? So there's just too many options, and also Kyrie. I know he has moments defensively, but I think their backcourt that might be one of the keys to this series is can Dallas's backcourt step up in terms of defensively, and is their defense? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe their defense is to that level, another level than I thought it is, and are they able to contain Boston in order to win that series? Because I think if they don't contain Boston, I don't think they're winning games 125 to 120. I think Boston's defense is too good, and I don't think the Mavericks offense consistently is going to be to that level outside of Luka Doncic. But Ben, what are your thoughts on that in terms of Dallas's offense going up against the Boston defense?
You mean the Dallas defense versus the Boston offense?
Yeah, correct. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, yeah. I mean, first of all, I think Dallas's defense in the paint in terms of clogging up the lane. That I think that is as advertised with Lively and Gafford. I don't see that going away. They've been so dominant there that even if it takes a step down, you know, I still think it's going to be very good. But like you said, the questions are on the perimeter. Boston, I mean, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking more from Boston. You brought it from Dallas's perspective. I was thinking from Boston's perspective. They're trying to mismatch hunt a ton on offense. That's their brand. So there's obviously Luka and Kyrie, right? Luka on defense, he's big, right? So he's a traffic cone in terms of he's super slow and not quick at all. So that's his problem. If he gets blown by, there's two guys behind him. Instantly there on the spot, but that can create some, passing, opportunities. Um, I think that's my question is what's Boston going to be chasing in terms of mismatches, and what can they do secondarily off that? So I think Luka and Kyrie obviously are on the table. Why? My question, it doesn't seem Lively's been able to be dragged out to the perimeter by other teams. And I'm wondering why that is. If Boston's going to be able to drag him out to the perimeter, get him switched on the outside, and go from there. Unless Dallas is playing like the zone, I don't see why that's off the table.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Boston mismatch hunts as much as Dallas. Obviously, every NBA team does in the pick and roll. But the other thing about Boston is, right, is like if they can get past Luka or the perimeter, and like I know you said like, oh, Dallas has big men at the rim. They do, but Boston's going to make their corner three pointers, right? This is not Minnesota. This is a team that is the best shooting team in the NBA. And if you give them open corner threes, they're going to drill three pointer after three pointer after three pointer because they just have too much talent and the players are too good, right? So I really think it's going to be, on Luka and Kyrie to keep those players in front of them to the best of their ability. Because just because you have big men at the rim, a collapsed defense, I think it leads to Boston open threes, and I think that's exactly what Boston wants.
Right, and people keep on bringing up Porzingis. I don't know if they're bringing up more defensively or offensively as compared to Al Horford. Al Horford this playoffs have been shooting 34% from three, which is not great. And he's been super streaky, so he'll have nights where he's 0 from 6, 1 for 7. So that's not ideal, but 34% is enough, even if Porzingis is not available.
Yeah, it's enough, and especially if he's in the corner, right? That percentage goes up even more. Um, but yeah, I I mean I expect Jason Tatum to have a really good series. I don't expect him to play like he did in the last NBA Finals. He was when he played the Warriors. He was it felt like he was like shell shocked that he was in NBA Finals and he played like garbage. Um, and like I know Andrew Wiggins was a good defender in that series, but it wasn't like, oh, he got shut down by Wiggins. It was more like Tatum was playing like a garbage can. So I expect him to be much better in this series. I think he's a better player. He's a stronger player. I want to see him go to the rim more. I know Dallas has, rim protectors, but I don't like when Jason Tatum kind of falls into that like jumper happy zone where he just likes taking contested mid range. If it's open threes, that's one thing. even though his 3-pointers are streaky, but take open threes. But I want to see him get aggressive, go in the paint. Jaylen Brown's been really good this postseason. I mean, everyone in Boston has, so it's kind of redundant to say everyone, but I mean, he obviously won Eastern Conference Finals MVP, and me and Ben kind of talked about this. In terms of, I mean, obviously Boston's Achilles heel has been like in the clutch, so it's kind of like who are they going to go to? It kind of seems like Jaylen Brown's kind of taken that role, and Boston's kind of just okay with Jaylen Brown taking those clutch shots, despite Jason Tatum probably being the best player on the team. So if they're okay with that and Tatum's okay with that, we'll kind of see how that goes. We'll see if the games are close. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if we saw a couple Boston blowouts. I know that's maybe I'll come to regret that, but I just think from the 3-pointers and things like that, they have a chance to blow them out. Yeah, Porzingis is definitely a huge factor because Boston's been playing the creft out of Al Horford basically, right? They've just been playing him like 40 minutes a game, and the dude is like 40 years old, right? So it's like I know the first couple games there's like 3 days between, so that's going to help Al Horford. But Porzingis being back, even if he's playing only like 15, 20 minutes a game, just to spell Horford a little bit, keep him fresh defensively, offensively, that's going to be the key. And then Holiday has had some postseason struggles in the past. He's been inconsistent, but this playoffs he's been excellent. So he's another key if he's hitting his threes. But again, he's kind of like that's the thing about Holiday is like last year with the Bucks or the past couple of years, he was like the second option, right? Or maybe borderline the third option. Here he's like the fourth, fifth option. Like they need him more for defense and like where he fits in offensively. And then you have Derek White as well. I mean, the depth really isn't fantastic. Their bench is not it, but I think their offense is, offensively going to be enough to carry them. Did you have anything else to add on in terms of Boston offensively?
Yeah, a couple points. I mean, something we've been coming out with Boston is the number of attackers they have on offense, number of ball handlers they have. Drew Holiday has been pretty good so far. He's been a question mark in general in the playoffs, and Derek White this playoffs has not been excellent. In terms of he's been good from three. His field goal percentage has been streaky. He's gonna have to be pretty solid. Because if he's the three, then Holiday's the four, and you're good. If he's meh, then Holiday better be good. So one of those two guys is gonna have to be good. Is what I'll say there. And then interesting, you talked about Tatum. I gotta bring this up with Tatum. Before Game 5, if you take out Luka's Game 5, which was out of control, you don't take that away. But we were doing blind resume after Game 4. Boston played 4 games, and the Mavs had played 4 games, and Luka, everyone was very high on Luka after having those games without the last game. And if you did the blind resume, Tatum and Luka, it was pretty similar. Luka obviously had more assists, but everything else was pretty similar. So just kind of narratives in terms of one guy's completely disappointing and one guy's playing like he's carrying the franchise and is going to be a top 5 all-time player. Whatever. Tatum's pretty good. Tatum's not going to have that Luka game. It's not in the bag, but he's going to be pretty good in terms of putting up 25, 30 points a night on solid efficiency. The last thing I'll point out, something you brought up, I just thought when you brought this up with Tatum getting lazy, for lack of a better word, with willing to take those pull-up shots. If he's willing to do that in that series, it's going to be particularly a problem because if he's willing to do that, Luka can defend him there. Luka's problem is that he's going to get blown by. But if Tatum's not going to blow by him, Luka's going to be fine covering that shot. And so if Tatum's willing to do that, you can hide Luka on Tatum low key, and then right, Luka normally have to card on their worst player, but if you can hide him on their best player, that's a whole dynamic offensively. So I think Tatum, like you were saying, needs to get to the rim specifically in this matchup to force those rotations and to not allow them to give Luka an out or give the Mavericks an out in terms of how they're going to hide Luka.
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree with you, and I think that that's an interesting point to add about how is Luka going to work defensively because I think Boston's going to make Dallas work much harder defensively than Minnesota did. Minnesota was kind of just like, okay, let's worry about Anthony Edwards and everyone else. Like, who cares? You know what I mean? Like, if Karl Anthony Towns scores 45 points, like, we'll take it. You know what I mean? But Boston just has too many talented offensive players. But I think it's key what you're saying that they need to make Luka work and they need to make Kyrie work, right? And I think that's going to slow them down on the other end of things. But yeah, 100%. I think it's the aggressive Tatum and aggressive Jaylen Brown. And Boston's the best shooting team in basketball, so I would expect at least one game of like they just win the game because their 3-pointers were just so much better than the other team. And Porzingis will definitely help that, and Porzingis will help defensively. But are you
The
ready
other
to move on
thing,
to the? Go ahead.
the other thing, we're talking 3 pointers wise, center wise, is like Horford. I think at least offensively is fine as compared to Porzingis. But in those backup minutes where they're bringing in garbage can center who can't shoot, that's where the spacing issue comes in. And God forbid if Horford got hurt, and those guys are now playing a lot more minutes with no shooting at the five, that's going to clog up Boston.
Yeah, 100%. Especially because I don't think that. I mean, even though Drew Holiday's been good this postseason, I don't think they're going to be guarding like locked up on him from the 3-point line. So you got to give Tatum and Brown space because at the end of the day, they're not going to win the series unless those two guys play really well. And that's going to be the key. But let's move on to the Dallas side offensively. Yeah, obviously this postseason, Luka's been, the last series he was great. The first couple of series not so much, but seems like he's found his rhythm. And Kyrie especially seems like he's found his rhythm. And it's kind of those two guys, and also PJ Washington. We're not going to disrespect PJ Washington on this show, all right? This is a pro PJ Washington podcast. And he's won them a couple games or two, and it feels like every single 3-pointer where it's like, okay, they need this 3-pointer, he's swishing it, right? It's not rolling around the rim, it's not hitting the backboard, it's swishing. It felt like he hit like 5 or 6 shots. I think I saw a compilation on Twitter where like literally there's like 4, 5, 6 shots like that. It's just absurd. And he's had obviously in that OKC series, he had a couple 20, 25 point games, I think it might have been. So he's been huge for them offensively. Because if you look at Dallas offensively, right, you have Luka, who's obviously, either the best or second best offensive player in the sport. I think we can agree on that. And then you have Kyrie, who struggled kind of in the OKC series, but it seems like he's found his rhythm. Although this is going to be a much tougher defensive matchup, but we'll get into that in a second. And then outside of that, it's like Derek Jones Jr., which is they have him for defensive purposes. PJ Washington, is he going to continue to just like hit threes and score 20 plus points? And then it's like Gafford and Lively who are like, yeah, they're not going to miss shots, right? Like I think Lively didn't miss a shot in the conference finals, but it's like that's because Luka's setting them up for dunks, right? That's what their offensive game is. So they kind of need Luka and Kyrie to be great offensively, in order for them to win this series. Because I don't think they're going to be able to slow down Boston defensively. But what are your takeaways in terms of does Dallas? I mean, it kind of sounds crazy. Does Dallas have enough offense, or is Dallas completely relying on Luka and Kyrie both being excellent for them to have enough offense to win that series?
Um, so I mean, it's kind of interesting going through this, like just on both sides of the ball, but offensively for Dallas, like Dallas to me much more. Everyone on their team is what they are. Um, Whereas the Celtics have a lot more variables in terms of, I feel like, in terms of swings of this player could go like this, or this could go like this, or this. But Dallas, I mean, Luka's going to be, I would assume, what he was for the first 4 games of the Minnesota series, where he's going to be 30 points on good efficiency. Um, Kyrie's going to be is what he is, which is he might be slightly streaky. Um, but I don't know. I think streaky, but he stays out of the way. And when streaks do hit, they seem to hit when they're needed. So I think those guys are kind of going to be what they're be. PJ in terms of PJ and then Lively's also going to be what we Lively's greatness is really Luka's greatness. We see this with Trae Young, Capella. The credit goes to when Lively gets a dunk, that goes to Luka and the spacing and passing that he provides. So I think those parts of the thing are what they are. The swings for Dallas is for PJ Washington, which low-key just looking at the game log, those 3 games against OKC, 29 points, 27 points, 21 points. Outside of that, he's been like 10 to 15 points on mid efficiency from 3. So the 3 pointers have really been super clutch more than actually a high percentage. So we'll see how long that lasts. We'll see. So I think it's going to be interesting if PJ Washington is going to at least have one game where he gets to 25 points. So that's a swing. I think it's going to be a swing if PJ Washington's going to keep hit. If his 25% 3-point percentage is going to be the 25% they need, or if it's going to be a random 25%. We'll see if that balances out or not. And then the other swing for them offensively is if Luka can go from game 1 through 4 Luka and turn into game 5 Luka. If he can do that more than once. I don't think he can even do it once. But, can he do it twice? Is I think what they might need. And that's kind of my thoughts on this Dallas's swings.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it because when you're looking at a series and predictions, you kind of got to look at the possibilities of like what if Dallas were to win this series, what went right, and I think they're going to probably need a Luka A+ game like they got in Game 5, and they're probably going to need a role player to win them a game. They're going to be like, oh, that was the PJ Washington game, just because I think they're lacking talent in compared to Boston. So they're going to need that outlier game. Maybe it's a Derek Jones Jr. game where Derek Jones Jr. scores 25 points. I don't know. Um, we'll have to see, but there isn't that
They'll
many
probably also
options.
have a game. If they win, they'll probably also have a game where they won a tight game late, and they just beat. They just beat Boston in late game tactics.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I think I'm not as confident in Kyrie as you are. I think Kyrie is pretty streaky, not like a little bit streaky. I think he's pretty streaky. He's coming off a good streak, but in terms of perimeter defense, let's get into that. Some of the Boston defense, the matchups wise, um, they have Derek White and Drew Holiday. Which if I'm obviously no one's stopping Kyrie necessarily, if he's on. But if I need two defenders to guard Kyrie Irving in a playoff series, those might be my first two picks. Maybe I throw in Caruso or Trey Murphy or something. But those are two of my top 5 picks in the league. You know, people that are kind of like new nuisances, I guess is the word. It's not a great word, but kind of just like they'll be on him. They're not needed necessarily in massive roles offensively, so they can use their energy on defense. They can crowd up on Kyrie. They can fight over screens. They can get their hands in there, get some steals. And I think Kyrie Irving's going to have his work cut out for him. We saw, obviously, this was a few years back when he was on Brooklyn, but they played this Boston team. Um, I think Derek White was on that team, but maybe not Drew Holiday. It might not have even been either of them, but he struggled with this team. It's just a really good defensive unit that even though Minnesota had, people are talking about are they historically great defensively, but in terms of matchup wise, those are two players that I think are going to be on Kyrie and it can make it very tough. And I think Kyrie's going to struggle this series personally. Obviously, it could be wrong. And in terms of Luka is going to end up getting his points. That's just the type of player he is. But I think Boston can make him work much more than some other teams. Again, they don't necessarily have the perfect players for Luka, but Jaylen Brown and Tatum, maybe see some Drew Holiday, even though he's a little bit small. They're guys who can make him work a little bit. And I'd love to see Jason Tatum put in some effort defensively. I know it's a lot to ask. You got to be great on both sides of the court, but you're an NBA superstar and this is the NBA Finals, right? So make Luka work a little bit. Maybe Jaylen Brown make Luka work a little bit. And in terms of PJ Washington, right? It's just like, yeah, is he going to have that game where like PJ Washington has 5 threes and it's like, okay, that's why they won the game? It's possible. But again, this is a whole new matchup where 105 points is not winning no games, right? If they score 105 points, I'll put my money right now. They're going over 4, right? So they're going to have to score 115, 120 points. And the ways to do that is you got to be really executing offensively. And obviously that's going to come down to Luka a lot. And I don't think they can afford a bad Kyrie series. And I think they're going to need a PJ Washington game here or there because outside of that, they really don't have that many offensive options in terms of swing pieces. Like I know you mentioned, it was like pretty much PJ Washington and Kyrie Irving, and that's kind of it. So that kind of is what it is from that perspective. And then that's the other thing. It's like I think Boston's a lot smarter defensively. So it's the type of team where like Luka, let's say, gets past the perimeter, gets in the paint, they can double Luka, right? And then it's like, okay, Derek Jones Jr.'s in the corner for 3. Like I think Boston will live with that, right? Not that he can't hit his threes, but like, and he hasn't, and like he has in his playoffs to some degree. But I think Boston will definitely live with that. And then Porzingis is going to be big because Dallas does have some real centers, like legitimate 7-foot centers. And I think a presence like Porzingis at the rim would be massive. But do you have anything else to add in terms of Dallas offensively and things of that nature, or what Boston can do defensively potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on the biggest thing is they've got bodies. Boston has 3, 4, 5 bodies that they can throw at Luka and Kyrie. The Timberwolves had people were talking about McDaniels and maybe Anthony Edwards, and really McDaniels wasn't a great matchup for Luka, so it was really Anthony Edwards who had to be their entire offense as well. So that's just not nobody does that. That wasn't happening. Um, so Boston's got the bodies. And also another issue the Timberwolves faced was foul trouble because they had 1 or 2 options to throw at these guys, and if they got fouls, that's a problem. Boston's got bodies; they can foul. It's not going to be a problem. If the guy gets in foul trouble, bring the next guy. So I think that's their biggest advantage. I think they're going to be able to, yeah, like you said, specifically for Kyrie, they've got bodies to be able to go one-on-one. and then with Luka they throw the double, and you can double and recover out to the threes. Hopefully, I think the question is, can they need to be able to double and but also affect? They can't have Lively dunking the ball every time. So when they double, can Horford hold up against Lively? Porzingis hold up against Lively one-on-one? Or if, when you're recovering to the three-point line, your guys are out of position the way you have to do that. Some of these, Lively might get some good matchups with all the scrambling around Boston might be doing with these doubles on Luka. We'll see if they go singles on Luka. I don't know. In a certain way, I think you treat Luka like the best player in the league, where you don't leave him singled up too long if he's starting to get hot. Like I'd be not timeouts, but in the same kind of vein, I'd be pretty have quick hooks there before we let Luka shoot 3 shots in a row that he's hit from deep. Yeah, I think Lively when they're going with the doubles and trying to bar those threes, I think Lively might be a bit of a factor. But I'm with you overall. Like on paper, Boston should be able to just outscore Dallas. I'm just very scared of Dallas in terms of that inevitability, X factor that I thought the Nuggets had, that Golden State has, Kansas City has. I think in football, I think Bengals have some of that. Patriots had that. On paper, Boston should be able to outscore them.
Yeah, I hear your Lively point, but like at the end of the day, like if Lively scores 30 points, like okay, But I do think Porzingis is big in that sense in terms of Porzingis will match up much better with Lively than Horford. Horford's a solid defender for his age, but it's just he is 40 and he can't like athletically he's not there. I think Porzingis like being that 7'3" guy who can kind of protect the rim, that could be helpful. But
Honestly, of the things we've mentioned, kind of the biggest thing that stands out to me in a weird way is if they're going to be playing their backup center. If Boston has to play their backup centers with no shooting, like that's going to be a problem. I think that's going to slow them down offensively to a point where it's going to get closer. Is Porzingis supposed to be back? I mean, do you know where we're at with that?
there hasn't been much news either way. But I think he's going to be back, but I haven't seen any reports either way.
Yeah.
All
I
right,
think
let's get into our. I'll go for it.
No, I'm good. I'm good.
All right, let's get into our
Oh, do we have
predictions for
picks?
this series.
Oh yeah, okay.
Let's get into our predictions for the series. I guess I'll start and go to Ben. I have Boston in 5. Okay, now that might be a bit bold. It might come back at the end of the series and be completely wrong, kind of like I was with Phoenix. I thought Phoenix would beat the Minnesota. What did I say, 5 or 6, and Timberwolves end up sweeping them. But I just think Boston's. Now that we break it down, it just makes it even more clear. Like Boston's just a better team. They have more talent. They have the perimeter defenders to guard Kyrie. They have the bigger wings to be able to affect Luka to some degree. And then I don't even know how Dallas made it this far. I kind of they just faced teams like in terms of the Thunder and where Jalen Williams wasn't really able to step up and Minnesota where they just didn't have enough offense. So like Luka's going to like be able to get you to a certain level of offense that like the other team just like wasn't able to get. But I don't think Boston's going to have that issue. I think they have the people for Kyrie. They have the bodies for Luka. I don't think Dallas is going to have enough shooting in terms of Derek Jones and PJ Washington. I think they might have the centers might be their advantage, but again, I think if Porzingis comes back, that's not going to be much of an advantage. And Luka, I think wins them a game is pretty much where I'm going with that. But unless Tatum just kind of plays like he did in last year's final, and not last year's, but when they played Golden State in the finals, that's like the only path I see to like the Boston not winning this series, or like Luka just has like 4 games like he did in Game 5. But yeah, Boston, in terms of shooting, they have a ton of shooting. There's no reason for me to think that's going to stop in the finals. They have the perimeter defenders. They have everything. And I expect Tatum to have a much better series than he did last go-around. I expect Jaylen Brown to be much better. So I'm going to say Boston in 5. But Ben, what about you? What do you think about the series?
Listen, I bought my Boston Finals cap. Paid $39 for that. If they lose, that thing is gonna have to go in the garbage can. So I think
Keep
I
the
think
receipt. Keep the receipt.
keep the receipt. Send it back to New Era. I wonder if they just get like tons of returns of these finals hats like the day after the day after
They
if
give
they
them out
lose.
in Africa for free, Ben. You're gonna have a bunch of
Oh,
African kids wearing the same hat as you.
oh yes sir, yes sir. So I am picking Boston. I don't like to say 6 because I feel like that's when you like rank 1 to 10 and you say 7. Like rank how good my food is 1 to 10 and you say 7 to like not have to give a real answer. So I don't want to say Boston in 6. I'll say Boston in 5. I think Boston is going to give a game away. at some point, a late game away, more than I think. I don't think Luka's having a game like he had with Game 5. With the bodies Boston has, they're not, Dallas is not going to be up 3-1 at any point that you can be chucking shots and also up 20 and, chucking shots that we don't matter if it misses. Boston's got the bodies. And and part of my thing with Dallas is their late is I was believing their late game tacticians. They gave one away to OKC, who I did not believe. I think Boston's gonna be okay. Like I said, I think they've established Jaylen Brown in that role. Um, so I think the Mavs might get one close one. Honestly, I'm more leaning towards Boston in 6 than Boston in 5, but I don't want to say 6 because I think that's cheating. So I'm gonna say Boston 5 as well, but not really because Luka gets a big game, but more because Dallas gets a close one late.
Yeah, I mean, since we both picked Boston, I want to get into maybe like what could potentially happen where Dallas would win. Like if we come back, in 2 weeks and Dallas won the series in 6 games or something like that, or 5 games, like what potentially went wrong. And I'll say my main reasons would be number one, Tatum plays like a garbage can, right? He goes back to finals against the Warriors status where he just can't make a shot. He's playing timid, he's making bad decisions, turning the ball over. Number two is Luka is just phenomenal, right? You have A+ Luka, and I think A+ Luka is very scary, and it's definitely a player that could potentially win a series, not on their own literally, but be a reason why they won that series. And then number three, which Ben brought up, is maybe the centers. Maybe Boston can't, quite handle Derek Lively and Gafford's athleticism, and maybe they get killed on the boards potentially. And if they're doubling Luka, they get some easy runs. And you look at the end of the series, and Gafford averaged 18 points and 12 rebounds, and that was just enough for them to win the series. So I would say those are my main three reasons, Ben. What do you see going wrong if Dallas were to win the series? What do you think would have happened?
Yeah, I mean, just think through it. I don't think you're going to get a Kyrie dominating the series. Like I said, I think Kyrie, the defense Boston has against Kyrie is just too good. I don't see that as a possibility. I think you got the role player game where PJ Washington, combined with Luka being normal, Luka and Kyrie, everybody being normal, just PJ Washington goes as like the swing in that game. I see that being the thing. I see Dallas winning instead of one late game, maybe they win two or maybe even three. I don't see Jason Tatum falling apart. I don't think that's a factor really. I'm not worried about. Once we get to like game 6 and 7, if it's been a tight series or Boston has been down in the series and it's getting pressurized, that's when I'm maybe worried about Jason Tatum. But until that point, I'm not concerned about that at all. So I've got lively I'm sorry. Yeah, the Washington swing games. I've got Dallas just dominates, close games late in terms of, just how to deal with that. Um, I don't see I don't see a world where, if Luka has Game 5, Luka 4 times. Yeah, that is called carrying the franchise. I'm anti-carrying the franchise term. That Game 5 was carrying the franchise. To me, generally, I haven't followed basketball forever. I'm not a basketball historian, and I'm sure, like Steph Curry had one of those games when they won the finals. He had one game the entire playoffs, and Luka has had one game without this playoff run. I don't see a world where maybe it's one more, maybe. I don't see a world where he's got 2 or 3 of those in the bag. I think the third one is it comes down to the centers. We didn't even talk about the boards, but yeah, for sure. I think the offensive rebounding combined with, if Boston ends up with a lack of shooting from that position, that could potentially clog down their offense. So I would say Washington, lack of shooting / boards from the centers, and late game, Dallas, doing their thing.
Yeah, I think those all make sense. I think we're going to wrap up the podcast there. We'll probably do a podcast. I think after game two might be Sunday or Monday, maybe after the first 2 games, we'll come out with a podcast. Definitely we'll do one before the end of the finals, minimum, maybe two. We'll have to see how it goes, and then we'll probably do a finals recap. And then once it starts getting towards that, we'll probably do after that. I'm assuming we'll do some type of NBA playoffs recap episode, maybe something like that. And then it'll be NBA draft season. And then maybe we might have to start previewing some NFL. We haven't done much NFL on the podcast, but it's just not really the season. So once we get closer to the NFL season, we'll get more into that. But again, quick shout out. Go follow us on social media at The Agendas Pod, Twitter and YouTube and TikTok. Yeah, we'll catch you guys on the next one.